Hi, everybody. I am going to start chapter 1 today. Grab some coffee or something to drink, and I am going to introduce you to my book. No, that's not true. I already did the introduction. This is chapter 1. Kind of hard to tell this story, but I think it really needs to get out. I haven't told anybody this story until I was 48, maybe, somewhere in there. And I told it to a fella at church, and once I did share it, the Lord came to me and said, you need to be sharing your stories. These are really, really important for people to hear. And I've kept them all to myself for many, many, many years because, they were pretty precious to me. But what good are they if nobody hears them or knows me, or nobody benefits from it if I keep it to myself? And I really think there's a benefit to these chapters. So let's get started before I go down another rabbit trail. It was in 1964. I was 5 years old, and I was the last of 6 kids. All the kids were in school. I was home with Mom alone. And in Grand Rapids, Michigan, this took place. And I was downstairs playing. Mom was on the phone upstairs. We had a basement that I like to play in. And as a little boy, you're inquisitive and things, but I was down there playing, and I found, now I remember this like it was yesterday, so very traumatic in my life, but what I found some of those long matches. You ever seen those way back when? They used to light furnaces with them, and you had to reach way into the furnace and light the pilot light. And so what I was doing is I figured out how to do that, and I would blow the pilot light out, and then I'd strike that match, and I would put that all the way into the furnace and relight the pilot light, and I thought that was just dandy. And heard Mom talking on the phone upstairs, and she said on the phone, she was talking to her friend, she says, T's pretty quiet downstairs. My mom always called me T. She never called me Trace. Well, she did sometimes, but she said, T's pretty quiet downstairs, and I better check on him. So she yells down the basement, T, what are you doing? And I said, nothing, Mom. And I blew out the match and threw it. And I went upstairs, and Mom started smelling something burning. And she's like, I gotta go, and hung up the phone and said to me, what were you doing downstairs? Nothing, Mom. And we went downstairs. I don't know why they had this down there, but they had big 55-gallon drums of trash in the basement. I don't know why. We just did things like that. And both 55-gallon trash containers full of trash were both engulfed in flames. And she immediately went into action and said, I don't remember what she said exactly, but I'm sure there was a cuss word there, and Mom never cussed. And she ran and grabbed one of those barrels and headed for the upstairs on fire. And she said, T, get the door. And I said, I can't, Mom, I'm too scared. And she said, get the door, and kicked me. And my mom never hit me, or never did hit me. It was the only time she hit me my whole life, and kicked me. And I shot up those stairs like lightning, and I opened the door, and Mom come out with this barrel on fire, ran out the back door, turned it upside down, and ran back downstairs. And I ran back down with her, and this one's really engulfed. And she grabs this 55-gallon container full of fire and runs upstairs. I mean, the flames were touching the ceiling. It was just bad. And she runs outside after I got the door. She turns the second one upside down. And we ran back downstairs to make sure nothing else was on fire. And we both looked at each other. And my mom said, T, what have you done? And she looked at her arms, and her shirt was all off, and her skin was draping off of her arms. Chest was all burned real bad, and her hair was all burned off in the front. And when she said, T, what have you done? I mean to tell you guys, if you've ever hurt your mom, you know how I feel. And it was a difficult time in my life. And I was only 5. And if you don't think a 5-year-old can remember things, you're wrong. So at that very moment, I wanted to die. And I remember collapsing in a heap and bawling my eyes out. And I don't remember too much after that very moment. And then I kind of remember Mom being upstairs. She should have gone to the hospital. I don't know why she didn't. Maybe we didn't have insurance or something. I don't know. She should have gone to the hospital as an adult looking back. And it was bad. And she had picked all her shirt and stuff out of her skin. And when I remember this, she was sitting on a couch and she had put something on it and wrapped it in white gauze, all her arms, and covered all this up. And she was sitting on the couch. And I was just sick. And the kids, 5 older kids, started coming home from school. And one by one, and they'd all say to Mom, what happened to you? And I could hear her say in the other room, well, T was playing with matches and I got burned. And I remember those kids coming to me and whooping on me, as siblings do. What are you thinking, T? And I didn't know what to think. All I knew is that I'd hurt my mom, and now my siblings are beating me. And I found myself in a heap in a bathtub with the shower curtain pulled in a fetal position. I just couldn't take it anymore. And they all said, wait till Dad gets home. And I don't know if you guys know who my dad was, but he was kind of a tyrant our whole lives and kind of an abusive man. And my mom was a saint. My dad was abusive. And I'm sure you guys have had that in your life. Maybe you haven't, but it's just no fun having an alcoholic parent. But, and I'll talk about that later in my videos. But all the kids, every time they came home, the next one came home, oh, wait till Dad gets home. He's gonna kill you. And I was scared to death about what was gonna happen. And my dad came home, and he had a big, deep voice. I was scared to death of him. And he said, what happened to you? And then she said the same thing. She said, well, T was playing with matches and I got burned. Where is he? And she said, it's the only time she's ever said anything like this. She said, you leave that boy alone. The kids have been hard on him, and he's taken it real hard. And you leave that boy alone. And you know what? My dad never said anything to me. But I don't think my mom ever stood up to him. But my dad never came in and beat me or anything about it. He never really even talked to me about it, which was a blessing, I have to tell you. So time went on, and I suppose it had been 3 weeks maybe. I just wouldn't go downstairs anymore. I wouldn't go in the basement. I'd open the door, and there was a long staircase, and it was dark. Scared the crap out of me to go down there anymore. And I all of a sudden started playing down there, and maybe 3 weeks later or something. And Mom said to me, "Hey, T, I see you're playing in the basement. Good for you." She had encouraged me to go back down there and play, and not be frightened. And so she said, "What got you to go down in the basement and start playing again?" And I said, "Well, one day." I remember telling Mom this like yesterday. I said, "Well, one day I would go in there, I would open the door, I'd look in the basement, and I just couldn't do it. And it would scare me too bad, and I'd shut the door." Well, one day I opened the door, and there's this dude standing there in the darkness of the basement. And this dude says to me, called me by my full name, Tracy, and said, "Tracy, I need you to reach over there on the wall, turn the light on, and I want you to go downstairs and start playing. And I want you to stay in the light. Just stay in the light." I don't think he repeated that. I repeated that. And I'm like, well, he seemed like a friendly guy, and he knew my name. So I reached over there, turned on the light, everything, happy day. I went down and played. And I was explaining that to Mom. And she said, "What do you mean there was a dude?" I say dude now, but I probably said a man then. And she said, "What do you mean there's a man in the basement?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Is he still here?" And I said, "No." She was getting worked up. And I'm like, "No, Mom, that was when I went down and started playing." And she said, "Was it a neighbor? Who was it?" And I started getting a little scared, and Mom was definitely getting worked up. And I said, "I don't know. I don't know who it was, Mom." And she said, "If I show you a picture of him, would you recognize him?" I'm like, "Oh, sure. Yeah. I won't forget what he looks like." And she said, "Well, let me get some photos out." So she gets a shoebox, and she's going through these photos of neighbors. My dad was a big photography nut, so he had pictures all over the place. So he had his own darkroom and stuff. Well, she's showing me pictures of neighbors. I'm like, "No, Mom, that's not him." And then she starts showing me pictures of dead relatives, right? Is this him? Is this the guy? No, Mom, I don't know. No, you haven't shown me a picture of him yet. And so she's going through a book, flipping through pictures. And I stopped her in the book and I said, "That kind of looks like him." But he had a white robe on. I think it was a white robe, but he had something white on. And she says, oh, and she goes to this picture in this book and points to it, and it shows this guy sitting there talking to children in a circle. And she said, "Does that look like him?" And I looked at it, and I'm like, "Yeah, that's pretty close." He looks like he's talking to kids. Yeah. And I said, "Who is he?" And she says, "Well, honey, that's Jesus Christ." And I'm like, "Great. Who's he?" So my dad was a non-believer, atheist, whatever, Buddhist, whatever he was. And my mom was a lukewarm Methodist at the time. She loved to go to church and sing in the choir. That's all she did. So she was lukewarm at best. But she starts to tell me the story about Jesus Christ. And she tells me the highlights of his ministry or his teachings. And I'm like, what a cool dude. And I wondered at that time if that was him. I was pretty sure it was him, but I wasn't 100% sure that that was him, okay, at 5. So that was the first time I met Christ. Was in the staircase in 1965 in Grand Rapids, Michigan. But I never told anybody this story as I got older. I did talk to my mom about this story. Mom and I never talked about this again. And Mom was 90, 89, something like that. And she was living with my sister up in the Pacific Northwest, which I recently have lost her to now. But we were sitting at a table up there, and I had taken my daughter up to Washington to halibut fish. And my daughter and I were sitting there with my mom. And I said, Mom, I need you to talk about, we need to talk about what happened when I was a child. And I said, at the time, it was like 50 years ago. Now it's 60 years ago. Oh my gosh. And I said, I really need to talk to you about that. And I said, I want to know if you remember it, Mom. And my daughter's sitting right there. And she said, looked right up at me, and she said, the time you almost burned the house down? And I said, yeah, Mom. And you could just see her processing, going through the story in her mind. It was really something to hear the story in an adult's point of view. And you could see her processing, and she looks down just like this. She looks at her arms, and she said, funny, I didn't scar from that. And I said, Mom, I didn't scar either. Thank the Lord, right? So my daughter got to hear the whole story, both sides of it. And so that's why I'm sharing it with you guys today. And that kind of wraps up my first episode and where it all kind of started. And believe you me, there's more stories. There's more things that have happened all through my life. And I can't wait to tell you about them. This is episode 1, chapter 1. And we'll get started. The next chapter is all about being a 1.0 and all different times in my life, how that impacted me and how I got stalled out. I met this guy named Jesus, and I never followed him. I knew he was there. I felt him, but I still didn't follow him. And I even met the guy. I'm the worst kind, I tell you. But we'll get to chapter 2, and I'll show you what a mess I was and how the Lord helped me through thick and thin, even though I wasn't even following him, right? So, kind of crazy. I'm a dope. Anyway, here we go. I'll end here. Thanks for watching. Thanks for being with me. Thanks for being on my channel. Have a good one.